In just 27 seconds, a friendly chat turned into an absolute firestorm that ended with Prince Harry being physically escorted off the stage. What started as light conversation exploded into accusations, shouting matches, and a complete meltdown that left the entire studio audience sitting in stunned silence. This is the story of how one of the biggest names in the world walked onto Stephen Colbert's show and walked off in disgrace. The lights in the studio were bright as usual when Prince Harry walked out onto the stage. The audience clapped and cheered like they always do when a famous person comes on. Harry was wearing a nice suit and had a big smile on his face. He waved to everyone and sat down in the guest chair next to Stephen's desk. Stephen welcomed him with his usual jokes, and everyone seemed happy. The cameras were rolling live, which means millions of people at home were watching everything happen in real time. Stephen started with some easy questions. He asked Harry how he was doing and talked about the weather in California, where Harry lives now. Harry laughed and made jokes back. Everything seemed perfectly normal. The audience was enjoying the conversation, and people at home probably thought this was going to be just another fun celebrity interview. But that's not what happened at all. Then Stephen brought up Harry's family back in England. He asked a simple question about whether Harry missed his brother William. The smile on Harry's face got a little smaller. He shifted in his seat and said, "Well, that's complicated, Stephen." His voice had changed a bit. It wasn't as friendly and light as it was just a few seconds ago. Stephen, being the interviewer he is, decided to dig deeper. He said, "Come on, Harry. You've talked about this stuff in your book, in interviews, in documentaries. Surely you can tell us how you really feel about your brother." The way Stephen said it wasn't mean, but it definitely pushed Harry to talk about something uncomfortable. Harry's jaw tightened. You could see it on the big screens. He said, "I've been very clear about my feelings. I've been honest about my experiences. That's more than I can say for some people." The audience got quiet. This wasn't the fun, jokey conversation they expected anymore. Stephen leaned forward on his desk. "But Harry, a lot of people think you've been too honest. They think you've shared private family moments that should have stayed private. What do you say to those people?" Harry's face went a bit red. "Those people don't know what it's like to be trapped in a system that's designed to protect the institution, not the people in it. I had to tell my story because nobody else would tell the truth." "The truth?" Stephen raised his eyebrows. "Or your version of events? Because your brother and your father haven't exactly come out and confirmed everything you've said, have they?" That's when things really started to heat up. Harry sat up straighter in his chair. "They can't confirm it because they're too scared. They're too worried about what the press will say, what the public will think. I got out because I wanted my family to be free." Stephen wasn't backing down. "But you got out, and then immediately signed deals with Netflix and wrote a best-selling book. Some people might say you've made a lot of money by talking about your family. Doesn't that seem a bit hypocritical?" The word hypocritical hung in the air like a bomb about to explode. Harry's eyes narrowed. "Hypocritical? Are you serious right now?" "I left because the British tabloids were destroying my wife's mental health. The same tabloids that hacked phones, spread lies, and drove my mother to her death. And you're going to sit there and call me a hypocrite?" The audience gasped. This was getting intense. Stephen held up his hands. "I'm not calling you anything, Harry. I'm just asking questions that a lot of people are wondering about. If you do an interview on live television, you have to expect some tough questions." "Tough questions?" Harry's voice got louder. "You're not asking tough questions. You're repeating tabloid talking points. You're doing exactly what the British press does. You're twisting everything to make me look like the bad guy when all I've done is try to protect my wife and my children." Stephen's face got more serious. "Harry, with all due respect, you came on this show knowing we'd talk about these things. You can't just play the victim card every time someone asks you something you don't like." "Victim card?" Harry stood up from his chair. The audience got even quieter. Some people looked scared. "I'm not playing any cards, Stephen. I'm telling you the facts. But clearly, you've already made up your mind about me just like everyone else." Stephen stood up too, but he stayed behind his desk. "I haven't made up my mind about anything. I'm trying to have a conversation. But every time I ask you a legitimate question, you get defensive and act like I'm attacking you." "Because you are attacking me," Harry's voice echoed through the studio. "You invite me here, you smile at me, and then you ambush me with this crap. This is exactly why I don't trust the media anymore." "Oh, come on." Stephen's voice got louder too. "You don't trust the media, but you've done dozens of interviews. You did a whole documentary. You wrote an entire book. You clearly trust the media when it's convenient for you, when you're getting paid, when you're controlling the narrative." Harry pointed his finger at Stephen. "That's different, and you know it. Those were platforms where I could tell my complete story, not have some talk show host cherry-pick controversial moments for ratings." "For ratings?" Stephen looked offended now. "Are you kidding me? You're the one who's built your entire post-royal life on controversy. Every time you need attention, you drop another bombshell about your family. And now you come on my show and want to act like you're above it all?" The audience didn't know whether to clap or stay silent. Some people looked at each other confused. This was not what anyone expected to see on late-night television. The producers in the control room were probably freaking out because this was happening live and they couldn't stop it. Harry took a step closer to Stephen's desk. "You know what? This is bullshit. I came here to talk about my charity work, about my foundation, about the important things I'm doing. But all you want to do is stir up drama about my family, like every other blood-sucking journalist." "Hey!" Stephen's finger pointed back at Harry. "I'm not a blood-sucking anything. I'm doing my job. And my job is to ask questions that people want answers to. You can't just decide what questions you're willing to answer. That's not how interviews work. Then maybe I shouldn't be here at all." Harry's voice cracked a bit. "Maybe this was a mistake. I thought you were different, Stephen. I thought you were one of the good ones. But you're just like the rest of them." Stephen threw his hands up. "The rest of who? Journalists? People who ask you to explain yourself? People who don't just automatically agree with everything you say? Sorry if I'm not going to bow down to you just because you're a prince." "I don't want you to bow down," Harry was almost shouting now. "I just want to be treated with basic respect. I want people to understand what I've been through. Is that too much to ask?" "You want respect?" Stephen's voice matched Harry's volume. "You disrespected your entire family on international television. You aired their dirty laundry for the world to see. You made millions of dollars doing it. And now you want respect? You want people to feel sorry for you? You're a millionaire living in a mansion in California. Forgive me if I don't bring out the world's smallest violin." That was the breaking point. Harry's face went completely red. "You don't know anything about my life. You don't know what it's like to watch your wife suffer, to watch her being torn apart by the press, to feel helpless while the institution you were born into does nothing to protect her. You sit here in your comfortable studio making jokes for a living, and you think you can judge me?" "I'm not judging you," Stephen shouted back. "I'm trying to understand you. But every time someone asks you to reflect on your own actions, you blame everyone else. Maybe, just maybe, you need to look in the mirror and ask yourself if you've handled this situation perfectly. Because from where I'm sitting, you've caused a lot of pain to your family too." The studio went completely silent. Even the cameras seemed to stop moving. Harry stood there breathing heavily, his hands clenched into fists. Stephen stood on the other side of his desk, his face flushed, staring right back at Harry. After what felt like forever, Harry spoke in a low, angry voice. "I'm not going to stand here and be lectured by you about my family. You don't know them. You don't know what they're like behind closed doors. You have no idea what I've sacrificed." "Sacrificed?" Stephen's voice was sharp. "You gave up being a working royal. You gave up living in a palace. You gave up duties and responsibilities. But you kept the title. You kept the fame. You kept the money. And you act like you're some kind of martyr. That's not sacrifice, Harry. That's having your cake and eating it too. How dare you?" Harry's words came out like ice. "How dare you minimize what I've been through? My mother died because of people like you. The press killed her. The constant cameras, the constant pressure, the constant invasion of privacy. And I watched it happen. I was a child, and I watched my mother get destroyed. And I swore I would never let that happen to my wife. So I left. I protected my family the only way I could. And if that makes me a bad person in your eyes, then I don't give a damn." Stephen's expression changed for just a second. He looked like maybe he realized he'd gone too far, but then he doubled down. "Harry, nobody's saying you're a bad person for protecting your family, but you can't use your mother's death as a shield every time someone criticizes you. That's not fair to her memory, And it's not fair to the conversation we're trying to have. Wrong thing to say. Harry's eyes went wide with fury. Don't you dare tell me what's fair to my mother's memory. You didn't know her. You didn't love her. She was my mother. And I will use her as an example every single day if it means protecting my wife and children from the same fate. But that's the thing. Stephen was getting frustrated again. Your wife isn't in the same situation your mother was in. Your mother was trapped. She couldn't leave. She was in a foreign country with no support system. Your wife had options. Your wife chose to marry into the royal family knowing what it entailed. And then when it got hard, you both left. That's fine. That's your choice. But don't pretend like you're escaping the same nightmare your mother faced. You're not. Harry looked like he'd been slapped. His mouth opened and closed a few times before words came out. You're unbelievable. You're actually blaming my wife for what the press did to her. You're saying she should have known better. That's exactly the kind of victim blaming that makes me sick. I'm not blaming anyone. Stephen's patience was clearly running out. I'm trying to have an honest conversation about the choices you've made. But you can't separate legitimate criticism from personal attacks. Everything is an attack to you. Everyone is out to get you. Maybe the problem isn't everyone else, Harry. Maybe the problem is you. The words hit like a punch. The audience gasped again, louder this time. Some people actually said, "Oh no," out loud. The camera zoomed in on Harry's face, and you could see tears forming in his eyes. But they weren't sad tears. They were angry tears. That's it. Harry's voice was shaking. I'm done. I'm not staying here to be insulted on live television. This is exactly why I don't do these things anymore. This is exactly why I keep my family away from people like you. He started to walk away from the desk, heading toward the side of the stage. Stephen called after him. Harry, come on. Don't walk out. We can talk about this. But Harry spun around, his finger pointing at Stephen again. Talk about what? How I'm a terrible person. How I'm a hypocrite. How everything is my fault. No thanks. I've heard enough. Stephen came around from behind his desk. You're being ridiculous. You can't just storm off every time a conversation gets difficult. Watch me. Harry turned back toward the exit. Stephen's voice got sharp again. This is childish, Harry. You're acting like a spoiled brat who can't handle being told no. That made Harry stop in his tracks. He turned around slowly, and his face was a mask of pure rage. What did you just call me? Stephen realized he'd crossed a line, but he didn't back down. I called you childish, because that's what this is. Running away instead of having a grown-up conversation. Harry walked back toward Stephen, and for a moment, it looked like things might get physical. The audience shifted nervously in their seats. Security guards by the side of the stage stood up straighter, ready to intervene if needed. You want a grown-up conversation? Harry's voice was low and dangerous. Here's a grown-up conversation. You're a talk show host who makes millions of dollars pretending to care about important issues while you mock and belittle anyone who doesn't fit into your neat little worldview. You sit here night after night making jokes about politicians and celebrities, acting like you're some kind of moral authority. But you're not. You're just another entertainer who profits off other people's pain. Stephen's face went red. Get off my stage. Gladly. Harry turned to leave again. But Stephen wasn't done. And by the way, your book was boring. The only interesting parts were the bits where you complained about your family. Everything else was just self-indulgent whining. Harry stopped again. This time he didn't turn around. He just stood there, his back to Stephen, his shoulders shaking. The audience didn't know if he was laughing or crying or about to explode. Finally, Harry spoke without turning around. You know what's sad? I actually used to like your show. I thought you were funny. I thought you were smart. But now I see you're just another bully hiding behind comedy. And the worst part is, you probably don't even realize it. Oh, I'm the bully? Stephen's voice was filled with disbelief. That's rich coming from someone who wrote an entire book dragging his family through the mud. You want to talk about bullies? Look in the mirror, Harry. That was it. Harry turned around one last time, and his face was completely calm now. Scary calm. I feel sorry for you, Stephen. I really do. Because you're so consumed with being clever and getting the last word that you've forgotten how to be human. Good luck with that. He walked off the stage without looking back. The audience sat in complete silence. Nobody clapped. Nobody moved. The camera stayed on Stephen, who stood there looking angry and confused and maybe a little bit ashamed. After a few seconds, Stephen tried to recover. Well, we'll be right back after this commercial break. But his voice cracked a little bit. As the show cut to commercials, you could hear Harry's voice from off stage, muffled but clear enough. "Get me out of this building. Now." The studio audience started whispering to each other. Some people had their phones out, already posting about what they'd just witnessed. This was going to be everywhere by morning. The clips would be on every news site, every social media platform, every entertainment show. When the show came back from the commercial break, Stephen was sitting behind his desk alone. He looked tired. He didn't make any jokes. He just said, "As you saw, our interview with Prince Harry ended earlier than expected. We're going to move on to our next segment now." But nobody was paying attention to the next segment. Everyone was still thinking about what had just happened. The confrontation, the shouting, the personal attacks, the moment when a friendly interview turned into a war zone. Backstage, according to people who were there, Harry was furious. He was on the phone with someone, pacing back and forth, talking rapidly. His security team surrounded him, trying to get him to calm down and leave the building. Production assistants stood around awkwardly, not knowing what to do or say. One person who worked on the show said Harry kept saying, "I knew this was a mistake. I knew I shouldn't have come here." His face was still red, and his hands were shaking as he tried to button up his jacket and get ready to leave. The producers tried to approach him, maybe to apologize or smooth things over, but Harry's security team blocked them. "He's leaving," one of the security guards said firmly. "Don't follow us." And just like that, Prince Harry left the Ed Sullivan Theater, where Stephen Colbert's show is filmed. He got into a black SUV waiting outside and drove away into the New York night. Behind him, he left chaos. The show's staff was in shock. The audience was buzzing with energy, everyone talking about what they'd witnessed. And Stephen was still on stage, trying to finish his show like nothing had happened, but everyone could tell he was rattled. This wasn't supposed to happen. Celebrity interviews are usually carefully planned. The questions are often discussed beforehand, at least generally. There are boundaries that everyone agrees to respect. But something went wrong tonight. Whether it was Stephen pushing too hard, or Harry being too sensitive, or both of them letting their egos take control, the result was the same. A complete disaster. In the control room, the director and producers were probably having emergency meetings about what to do next. Do they address it? Do they ignore it? Do they release a statement? This was unprecedented territory for a show that usually runs smoothly. Meanwhile, social media was exploding. People who watched live were posting their reactions. Some supported Harry, saying Stephen crossed the line and disrespected him. Others supported Stephen, saying Harry was being too defensive and couldn't handle fair criticism. The debate raged online just as fiercely as the confrontation had raged on stage. The thing is, both of them probably had valid points buried under all the anger. Stephen was right that Harry has made a lot of money talking about his family drama, and that does seem contradictory to his stated desire for privacy. But Harry was also right that the media scrutiny he and his wife faced was intense and harmful, and that he has the right to tell his own story. But none of those valid points mattered in the heat of the moment. All that mattered was two men, both convinced they were right, both unwilling to back down, both letting pride and anger drive their words. And in the end, it destroyed what could have been an interesting, nuanced conversation. As Harry's SUV drove through the Manhattan streets, the lights of the city reflecting off the dark windows, he was probably replaying the conversation in his head, thinking about what he said, what Stephen said, where it all went wrong, maybe wondering if he overreacted, or maybe still angry, still convinced he was completely justified in walking out. Back at the studio, Stephen finished his show. He did his usual monologue, brought out his other guests, performed the comedy bits, but there was a tension in the air that never fully went away. Every few minutes, he'd glance at the empty chair where Harry had been sitting, and you could see something flicker across his face. Regret? Anger? Confusion? Probably all three. The credits rolled. The audience filed out, still talking excitedly about what they'd seen. They'd came expecting jokes and light conversation. They left having witnessed a full-blown confrontation between a talk show host and a prince. This was a story they'd tell for years. And somewhere in New York, in a hotel room or maybe already on a plane back to California, Prince Harry was probably on the phone with his wife, telling her what happened. Venting about the interview, about Stephen, about the whole experience. Glad to be done with it. Glad to be getting away from it all once again. The interview that was supposed to be a friendly chat, a chance for Harry to talk about his charity work, and maybe lighten his public image a bit, had turned into exactly the kind of media circus he'd spent years trying to escape. And in a way, that was the saddest part of all. No matter how far Harry runs, no matter how many times he tries to control his own narrative, he keeps ending up in situations like this. Confrontational, controversial, misunderstood. The lights in the Ed Sullivan Theater finally went dark. The cameras were turned off. The crew started cleaning up, preparing for tomorrow's show. But the impact of tonight would last much longer than the mess on the stage. This was a moment that would define both Harry's relationship with the American media and Stephen's reputation as an interviewer. Neither of them came out looking great. In just 27 seconds, everything had changed. That's all it took. Less than a minute for a normal conversation to turn into a shouting match. Less than a minute for two people to go from friendly greetings to bitter enemies. Less than a minute for a late-night talk show to become the center of an international controversy. And as the night grew later and the clips started spreading across the internet, one thing became crystal clear. This was a disaster that nobody would forget anytime soon. Prince Harry had walked onto that stage hoping to be heard and understood. Instead, he'd walked off angrier and more alienated than ever before. Stephen Colbert had started the interview hoping to have an honest conversation with an important public figure. Instead, he'd ended up in a screaming match that overshadowed everything else about the show. There were no winners here, just two men who let their emotions get the better of them, who chose conflict over understanding, who proved that sometimes even the most carefully planned interviews can spiral completely out of control. And millions of viewers who watched it all unfold live, unable to look away from the train wreck happening right in front of their eyes. This was the interview that ended with Prince Harry being escorted out of Stephen Colbert's show after the most dramatic argument in late-night television history. This was the moment that would be replayed, analyzed, and debated for months to come. This was the night that everything went wrong.